Hi, welcome back to the Boardroom Company Live, the podcast for professionals who are seeking a board career. I'm Naomi Kent, and welcome to this episode where we will be hearing and speaking about C-suite executive departures. Now, you'll hear and experience C-suite executives abruptly exiting firms for many different reasons. So it might be, downsizing the operations, or it might be due to a lack of fit or performance. And this creates an enormous risk to companies, from anything from reputation to competitive advantage. So have you ever wondered how firms manage that process so that both the executive and the business walk away with a positive outcome? Now, for those who are listening, and your decision makers, board members here on this podcast, I think this is going to be a big eye-opener for you, because you're going to really understand how to mitigate risk by safeguarding your business's reputation and also dealing with an exit of an influential leader. So joining me here today is someone who's an expert on this topic, Elizabeth Constantine, who is the owner of Abrio. It is a service provider for top-level executive terminations. Elizabeth, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Naomi. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, Elizabeth, your company, it kind of gets brought in when boards and C-suites have to make cuts at the top and they have to let executives go. And then your business, Abrio, supports the departing leader with almost like a concierge market re-entry service, right, to help them find their next opportunity after that exit. So from the board and the CEO perspective, what are the most common reasons you see C-level leaders being rotated out of their role?
Yeah, great question. And I'm laughing because you and I could probably trade stories for days on that one. But there are obviously a variety of reasons why we get brought in as an executive offboarding and transition provider. But I would say the three that we see the most often would typically be like change in business conditions, politics, or performance. So change in business conditions is pretty straight up, right? You have like an M&A event and you have two chief marketing officers, and all of a sudden, you just need one. Cost cutting is another one, or the reallocation of business lines or restructuring of products or verticals. So there's a lot that can be going on that side. Politics is also a wide and nuanced field, right? You know that we both play in that space. So if a board appoints a new CEO, maybe because someone retires or, the company performance wasn't there, so they made a change. Then the new CEO comes in, looks at the structure, looks at what has been working, what hasn't been working, and usually you see a lot of change after that. Politically, it can also be something as simple like someone barking up the wrong tree, aligning themselves with the wrong power players or the wrong agenda, or losing their protector after someone leaves. There's a lot that can be going on there. It's usually not just one. Usually it's a lot of things that tend to happen at the same time. And then the performance space also tends to be interesting, because at that level with like C-suite individuals, performance is never just a reflection of the leader, but on the performance of the underlying team structure as well. So things like a lot of turnover, a lot of terminations or voluntary exits, those kind of events, if they happen repeatedly, tend to prompt some questions where people start to look under the hood. Like, is the leader repeatedly hiring leaders that are not a good fit for the organization? Are they not communicating well? Like, what's going on? So long story short, there are a lot of things that can go sideways at that level. And a client of ours recently in the PE space recently said that pretty well. He said, it is what it is at that level. You swim with sharks. Sometimes you're going to get bit. That's part of playing the game. But the opportunities for adjustments are, as you also know, endless.
Yeah, it's a very good point. It happens, right? It's part of life. So you started your business about 4 years ago, is that right?
Yes.
And today, your company is now supporting some of the sort of highest profile exits in manufacturing, healthcare, and a lot of other industries. But of these companies that you work with who are sort of intentional, right, about this offboarding, and leaders that leave the firm, what are they doing differently that you see from perhaps others who are not?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I would say that, trying to think how I want to answer this. So executive transitions at that level are never an easy decision for all involved, unless something really drastic happened that warrants like an immediate exit, right? And we all know what those kind of situations could be. But I would say the companies who are really intentional about this, because they know that executive terminations and exits cause a lot of disruption, they're very expensive. From a backfilling perspective and from a transition perspective, I would say the companies that are very intentional about this make the exit the last possible kind of action to happen, and they look at other avenues first, like how can we help the executive turn things around, be more impactful? Would coaching be a way to assist? Would restructuring the role or the reporting line, is there something we can do to like tweak those kind of screws before they go down to the stage where they say, look, we can no longer support this. Maybe we need to take a look at our hopefully well curated succession line to make that change. So I would say the companies that are intentional don't act fast, even though it may seem fast to the person who's on the receiving end of that decision. Oftentimes the conversations that have been happening on the back end have been going on for quite a while, and that's often a surprise for people to hear.
So let's switch a little bit and talk about the benefits to the organization, because there's and you've been talking to me about how organizations can really benefit from allowing their executives to exit gracefully and with support. So tell us a little bit about what that means to companies and why that's important to executive teams and boards in the long term.
Yeah, certainly. So there are a couple of reasons. Generally, I would start by saying it's a small world at the top, right? And the way people are being treated on the way out really matters from an organizational and employer reputation perspective. So we typically get brought in for two reasons, and they're not mutually exclusive. So one could be to minimize risk for the organization in an executive departure situation. So sometimes the service that we provide, concierge, high profile, transition support, is sort of a means for the employee to accept the reality of what is happening and leave the organization gracefully without a full escalation. So that's the one side. The other side would be focus more on the employer brand. And there's a couple nuances there. Like one situation could be that the company legitimately wants to do the right thing for the person because the person was loyal, they did good work for a long time, but for some reason they are just not the right fit for the organization anymore. We see that in finance a lot. Typically when companies reach a new threshold from a revenue perspective, or when they are going from private to public, the CFO skill set for a public company finance position is very different than for 500 million middle market position. So oftentimes it was the individual did nothing wrong. They did good performance, but they're not the right fit anymore. So then the company says, let's help this person. The second reason could be that the decision makers who are administering these transitions, general counsels, chief human resources officers, look at the individual who is departing the organization and they realize that this person will be completely lost in the outside market because they never had to source an executive position at the C-level where the roles are no longer openly posted. And chief human resource and chief general counsel who are experienced know that these leaders have no idea how to navigate that world because it's very different on how these roles are being sourced. So that's another opportunity for the company to approach the individual and say, look, we understand that this position isn't ideal. we're grateful for the work that you did for us. And to show you that we mean it, we're going to give you like the best possible support to ease this transition, because we are invested in your long-term success and it is not personal. And that generally tends to go a long way with people.
Yeah, and I think companies that are thinking about their people, right? It's like you said, it's a great impression that they're leaving on the rest of the people that have left behind, right? That are still there.
Yes, and especially if the company line is always people are our most important assets. That really gets put to the test when you extend that statement to the very last day of the employee life cycle. So back to your early questions, companies who are very intentional about offboarding at the top, they walk this to the very end.
And I like that. And
yeah.
And let's talk about the people, right? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening have been let go in many different types of situations, and I'm sure there have been. It's does have a profound impact, right? Sometimes on your career, ego, confidence, sometimes even your bank account, right?
Sure.
What are the top 3 mistakes that you see leaders making, and then the top 3 recommendations for people who are trying to get back into a job and sort of going back into work?
Yeah. I would say there are so many things that you can do that can sabotage the process internally and externally, right? But I would say the 3 ones that come up the most frequently of like where I would say steer away from those would be delaying the market re-entry and not preparing properly. That's a big one. Having a sense of entitlement, that's something that people don't always want to hear. And then lastly, being too timid about engaging their network. So if I were to turn that around and go into what would be the best practices, then I would say prepare immediately. So resume, LinkedIn, make sure that you can graciously explain what happened without burning the other side in the explanation. Be on point with your interview training. Know what you brought to the table. Be polished. That's a big one, and that is especially the written presentation is important, because in a world where 90+% of positions are found through network, if the presentation is a mess, similar to like with board bios, then your high profile connections, so CEOs, fellow C-level leaders, board directors, partners and managing directors in the high profile headhunting firms, they will not stick their neck out for you if you're not on point. And then I think a big hurdle for people to overcome is reaching out to their network, right? Some people sometimes have the sense of entitlement that the phone should just ring with offers and opportunities. And that is not always how it tends to shake out. And sometimes we have to be very honest with clients and say, and use a sports analogy, sort of like, look, you had an exit. It was not your choice. Your situation is a little bit like the one of a sports player or an athlete after a maybe not so great season. The phone is not, in most cases, not just going to ring with agents who want to offer you the next thing. So you have to get out there. And that's tough for people, especially when they were always poached or promoted from within. And sometimes there's also the sense of embarrassment about what happened, which is understandable, but we really coach people to overcome that and move forward, and also remind them that this is more common than people are aware of, because people don't like to talk about it. So really the only way to get traction is to contact your network. And then the last piece of a best practice, I would say, especially for people who have had an exit situation that didn't quite go maybe how they would have wanted it to go, make sure that for the next round you have a seasoned and experienced labor law attorney who can help you with change in controls language and severance provisions and things like that on the way in, so that hopefully you won't have 2 of those in a row. But if business conditions, for example, were to ever change, you're set up from the get-go on the way in, and there will not be surprises.
No, I like that. It's definitely a lonely place when you're looking for your own job, right? So having a almost like a support team and a team
Yes.
around you, like yours, to kind of guide you through it. And you're right. I think we're not prepared to not have a job, right? We're prepared to have a job. So often
Yes.
people, even if you've been in the C-suite, you'd be like, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing, right? So
Yes, and that this space is tough, especially the negotiating exit conditions upon entry. That's a lesson that a lot of leaders really at the VP level start to learn the hard way. And in hindsight, the wisdom is always 2020, but yeah, it's fair.
So obviously you're seeing things from the company perspective, and then you're working with individuals who are kind of exiting. So you're seeing both sides of sort of like the career transition piece. What kind of trends are you seeing on either side, and any things that you predict may be happening in the future as well?
Yeah. Let me think for a second how I want to answer that thoughtfully. I would say from a company perspective, things are changing. It used to be pretty static, right? The decision gets made that a leader has to transition out. The paperwork gets drawn up. Maybe there's a little bit of negotiation, and then the company writes a check for like several months or sometimes even years of severance. They may throw in a little bit of support. Oftentimes the same support they would give to like departing middle managers, which typically doesn't work at the top, but then everyone moves on and moves along their way. That piece is changing. So if I were to explain it in a simplified way, then I would say with more concierge support, the departing executives' downtime in the market tends to get reduced. So that piece is probably fairly easy to understand, right? If you give someone in that position better tools and better strategies for the executive job search in this very micro space that is executive search, then they are set up to find their next opportunity quicker. So that's great. But with that, companies then also tend to get wiser and more savvy. So what we see from our lens is corporations who use us repeatedly and see that reduced market time for transitioning executives, they're starting to look at how much in severance do we want to pay and for how long, and how do we structure the agreements to kind of scale back a little bit on that double dipping that tends to happen at that level. So with that, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give profound legal advice, but like with that, we see a lot of companies looking at how they structure their agreements and approach severance not just generously, but really more strategically. And what that means for the executive, if we bring it back to the individual side per your questions that you so thoughtfully asked, I would say that means that executives are also being aware of that, and they are becoming more and more savvy about making sure that they really button up their agreements on the way in, which is important in every company type, whether it's public, private. PE is very difficult to understand sometimes. So that's a nuance where people are really getting savvy because of how quickly things can be shifting there. But yeah, that is what I would see. And especially with shorter tenures in the C-suite, like we've been seeing for years that the C-suite tenures are going down or reducing in time. That topic is just becoming more and more important for people.
So more exits, more changes, right? And then more transitions as well, it sounds like, right?
And more contracts.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And then the contracts and everything else that comes on top of it.
There's a nice saying out there that, we sometimes jokingly say to leaders in transition, which is like, for senior executives, the best way to predict the future is with the help of a good lawyer. And that is not wrong.
It's very true. But, I think also when you enter into a new role or a new business, I think everyone feels better when everything is written up already, right? There's going to be no surprises at the end of your term. And I think it makes everybody feel a lot better about it.
And that's also when, from the executive's perspective, your leverage is high, right? You're coming into the organization as that new shiny object. Nothing has been, there's no issues with relationships or anything going on that could like take that leverage away that you might have, that might impact the way you may be able to negotiate if something happens on the way out. So yeah, that's a great point.
This is fantastic. Where I talk a lot with board members about onboarding and bringing people into the business. And I think we forget about when people exit the business. And so this has been really critical in understanding how important that part is, as well as obviously welcoming new people. Now, you've been doing this for a while. You've actually published a book and you're a public speaker on the topic of kind of executive career ROI. So tell us about your book and what's in there that we may find interesting.
Yeah, gladly. So the book is called. So do you want me to show it in the camera?
Show it.
Okay.
It's
called. Gladly. It's called Like a Boss: How Top Executives Elevate Status, Grow Wealth, and Protect Their Downside. And it's sort of an extension of our market re-entry curriculum that we take departing leaders through as part of the transition when the company wants to include our offering as part of the severance package. So clients have been asking for it for a while, and eventually I caved because you have to give the people what they want. But the tagline of that book could possibly be like, as long as you work for someone else, you're always going to be replaceable. And that doesn't, help sell books. So that's not what I chose. But it is reality. It is a business reality that tends to make people, periodically very uncomfortable, which is why it's a good piece to remind, right? So the book, you asked what the book is about. So the book kind of peels back some of the things in more detail, like what we talked about, what we want departing or what we want leaders to know, whether they are departing or they are on their upward trajectory, maybe breaking into the C-suite or stepping into their first VP role for the first time, like things like general negotiation and negotiating your exit on the way in, how and why you should bring in outside counsel into an already pretty complex and multi-swim lane negotiation process if you've never done that. Starting your board journey earlier so that, you set yourself up for a broader scope of opportunities and impact and revenue new streams at an earlier age. And so you don't wait until like your retirement. So on the surface, it's a career book that is written with like humor and executive storytelling. Sometimes it's a little savage, sometimes it's a little sad, but it's all lessons to be learned. But if you look closer, then it's actually a little bit more than of a career book. It's really like a call to action to treat your career more like a business. So that in a world where, coming back to the concept that as long as we work for someone else, we're always going to be replaceable, to help people prepare and set themselves up to make their money earlier in life, squeeze more out of their working years, and reach that financial freedom earlier, so that when or if, a time would come where, a downside situation is happening, something unexpected, a curveball in your career, then you're less susceptible to those vulnerabilities, because that sort of frame of mind and being in that sort of position in life tends to help people bounce back easier. So, that's what Like a Boss is about.
I love it. Well, we've learned a lot here. I'm actually going to put the link to your book in the description on the podcast, and I'll put it on the YouTube page as well. But
thank you. I appreciate that.
I feel like there are two things going on, right? We've learned a lot. If anyone listening is a C-suite executive, it's time to start like kind of rethinking your future and also rethinking the exit potentially that could happen and when it does happen. And then on the company side, which I know a lot of my audience is as well, that they're the board members, they're the CEOs who might be making decisions about C-suite executives. I think hopefully it's helped change your mind about the importance of investing in departing C-suite leaders. There's both an opportunity and a risk there, right? And I think that you can mitigate those risks by supporting them on the way out. I also liked your comments about moving fast, right? The speed in which you get a C-level executive into their next role. It just makes things easier for them, less stress, less risk on their financials and their reputation. And that is a win-win for everyone. And I also loved your comment about the small world, because it really is, right? And you think you're leaving a company and slamming the door on the way out. It's just not a good idea. And for the company, slamming the door on someone on the way out, probably not a good move either.
Yeah, so, that's fair. And I would also add to that, in the spirit of it is a small world, like the C-level leader you're letting go today might be the board director tomorrow that might get to have a say on whether you will be on that board or not. So it all tends to come like full circle in this space often. And to your point, that's a very, excellent point to remember.
Well, Elizabeth, listen, thank you so much for sharing all of this. This has been really eye-opening, and I think it's a very important piece of the role of these leaders. So thank you very much for sharing your insights and joining me here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Wonderful.